Intrus? Never heard of him. Next up is the Divine Beast Samurai. At a base level, this is another build that likes to tank its way through boss attacks, while dealing damage to them. But why stop there? The Divine Samurai can use many other storm abilities very effectively to deal with various situations. At the center of this build, we have two items, the Divine Beast Helm and the Enraged Divine Beast Talisman. Both of these increase the damage of all storm-based abilities by a total 14%. Our main weapon of choice is a frost-infused Great Katana with the Ash 4 Storm Collar. This Ash has us summon a storm and spin our weapon many times at our enemies. The fact that we hit our enemies many times in a row means that this is very good for applying status effects. And the reason we're using the Great Katana is that it has innate bleed. And that means that if we infuse it with cold, we get the usual amount of frost buildup, but we also keep a decent amount of bleed buildup too, meaning that we're inflicting both status effects at once. With staggerable enemies, this is a stun lock machine. With amazing crowd control, your enemies never stood a chance. For bosses though, we more than have enough hyper armor, damage and stance damage to win trades against them. We're inflicting frostbite to these bosses, which take away a chunk of health and makes them take 20% extra damage for 20 seconds, but then we're also likely to inflict bleed at least once in the fight, making this a very deadly combo. You can straight up melt some bosses with this, if you know which attacks to trade with. In my offhand, I have a keen infused Uchi Katana with Stormblade on it. Now the same rules apply to this weapon. It has innate bleed, so we can infuse it with cold and get two status effects at once. That is, if we're hitting with the weapon itself. But honestly, we're not really using it up close. We're only using it to have a good ranged attack. And the keen infusion gives us around 5% more damage for that, so I use it instead, though the choice is up to you. Stormblade is easily one of the best ranged attacks in the game, and having it on this build gives us a ton of versatility that we wouldn't have otherwise. Also on my offhand, I use the Frenzied Flame Seal. This is the seal that gets us the most damage on this setup, and it weighs nothing, so there is no reason to use a different one. We use it to cast Golden Vow on Black Flame Protection for increased damage and defense. Defense is vital for winning trades with bosses using Stormcaller, and you don't want to trade with them too much without having these buffs active. The other spell I like to use is Divine Beast Tornado. At first, I thought this spell was just trash. It's true that it gets very long range and has a huge radius, but then it also has a very long casting animation. It deals very bad damage and almost no stance damage at all. It seemed like using this was pointless really, and the funny thing is, it was, at launch. But actually, the devs did buff this one, so that it now launches small enemies into the air. You see, this was never about dealing any damage, and you sure as hell should never use this against any bosses. But this change makes it so that this trivializes enemy encounters, especially with bigger amounts of enemies. The way I like to use this is to launch an enemy into the air, and then come close to stun lock them with Stormcaller. It's very satisfying. I mean, this Fire Knight usually gives me some trouble, but now I just knock him down and delete him out of existence. Another weapon that I like to use is the Albinoric Bow with Stormbone arrows. Now you should never be using this at medium range, because then it's just outperformed by Stormblade. You should be using it for sniping instead. The Albinoric Bow is excellent at this, and the Stormbone arrows are boosted by our setup. For talismans, we use the Enraged Divine Beast Talisman, the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman for more physical defense, the Shard of Alexander for more weapon art damage, and the Rotten Winged Sword Insignia, although this one is there to maximize weapon art damage. Feel free to use the two-handed sword talisman instead, if you want to focus a bit more on regular light and heavy attacks instead. For the look, we have the white reed set with the Divine Beast Helm. Pretty simple look all around, but I think it fits very well. This video is sponsored by you. That's right, you! If you leave a like and a comment, and maybe subscribe, you can help increase the reach of this video, and I can make more of these. It's a win-win situation. Also join the Clanky Mocha Discord server. It has doubled in size since last time. Come join us! We have hour-long arguments about whether Dark Souls 2 is bad or not, and the builds channel where you can share all your cool builds with us. I can't promise I won't steal them though. You'd fit right in! Link in the description below. Next up is the Hornsent sellsword. The sellsword is all about deflecting multiple attacks in a row and using successive attacks to build up power, and then when we find a long enough opening, we let out a guard counter to deal some very high damage. At a base level, this build is all about combining the effects of 3 items. First is our weapon of choice, which is the backhanded blades, and specifically for their guard counters, which is a very long and very stylish combo that deals absurd amounts of damage, and if you don't want to get hit while using it, then you better look for a big opening. The second item is the deflecting Heartier, which lets us deflect attacks by timing our blocks to them. It also increases our guard counter damage by up to 80% if we deflect 4 attacks in a row. The third item is our Ash 4, which is Royal Knight's Resolve. Now usually the way this works is that this is a weapon buff that buffs our next attack by 80%, and then fades away when we land it. But funnily enough, the way it works with our guard counter combo is that it only fades away when we land the final attack in the combo, but it does buff all the previous attacks. Meaning that if we get interrupted out of that combo, or even just miss the final attack, then the buff will stay on, and you can just use it on the next attack. This makes this already absurdly broken setup even more powerful. and it's just very funny. But wait! There is more! This is a faith build with 70 faith. We switch between the Flame Art Infusion and the Holy Infusion on our weapon depending on the encounter. Of course, that also means that we have access to all the most powerful faith incantations, and you should take full advantage of that. The best seal for our level is the Earth Ray seal, and we use it to cast Golden Vow and Black Flame Protection for more defense. For talismans, we're using the Cursed Sword Talisman for more ground counter damage. We also use the 2 consecutive attack talismans, and the last talisman is a flex spot. I actually took all the footage that you watched without having one equipped, and I didn't even know. Of course, you can't go wrong with more defense or stamina regeneration, but since we're dealing a lot of voice damage, you should also consider using the Dagger Talisman or the Blade of Mercy. For the physic, we have the Deflecting Heart tier, but I also switch between the Flame Shrouded Crack tier and the Holy Shrouded Crack tier depending on the infusion of the weapon. This also affects the spells I choose to use. I go with Fire spells if I infuse with Fire, and Holy spells if I infuse with Holy. For the look, we have the Cursed Blade Mask, the Bloodhound Knight Armor, the Nox Greaves, and the Black Flame Monk Gauntlets. This is one of these belts that just have no weaknesses. The balancing of this game is just something else, man. Next up, we have the Alchemist. Now, let me pause here for a moment. This is actually the first build I came up with for this series. Or at least, it's based on it. See, if you go all the way back to the first episode of this series, you'll see that I teased this character back then, more than 5 months ago. Well then, why did I wait so long to showcase this build? Well, as the name and look for this build imply, this was supposed to be a perfumer build. But there was one tiny problem, and that is that perfumes fucking suck. It's true, they don't even make you smell good. They're very slow, they deal very low damage, almost no stance damage, and you can't riposte with them. Now it's true that you can use the lightning or fire perfumes against enemies that are very weak to them. I'm talking like the scadutree avatar or the earth tree avatars, but try perfumes against any real challenge and they're just useless. Even with the running attack build, the deadly poison and chilling perfume bottles are the worst offenders here by far, and that's because they're very bad at applying their respective status effects. Which is what you'd expect them to be good at! The deadly poison bottle is greatly outshined by the poisoned hand or the venomous fang, both of which are way better as secondary options and also work very well as primary weapons too. And the chilling bottle? Oh, that one's just insulting. You get 60 frost build-up and that's it. You can't increase it in any way, and any infused weapon would get more than that. This is straight up one of the worst weapons in the entire game really. Using it is just a waste of time. But wait! It gets worse. All the perfume bottles have dex scaling, but they all have secondary stats that they scale with. And these differ from bottle to bottle. And so it's not really viable to make a build that tries to use all of them at once. Now, I thought that all of this was just too problematic. We have this entire new weapon type, and they're all completely useless. Surely FromSoft is gonna patch this, right? Right? Yeah, the last patch was 6 months ago, and it did exactly nothing. It's safe to say that FromSoft are just done with Elden Ring. But I am not! Because who needs perfumes? We can use other things in the game to give us the desired effects. No one can stop me from making this build possible. Not even you, Miyazaki. So let's get into it. So, what do we use to replace the perfumes? 2 Earthsteel daggers. That's it? Yes! Now, one of these will be cold infused with chilling mist, and the other poison infused with poison mist. Both of these ashes work the exact same way. Or do they? They both let out this melee attack that does very heavy status build-up, and coats your melee weapon with their respective status effects. And then they leave a mist that keeps applying status build-up. The only difference between them is that chilling mist doesn't scale with anything, meaning that we get to use it at full power without any stat investment. But Poisonous Mist does scale with Arcane, and this will be our main damage stat. Now the reason we're using Earthsteel daggers is that, well, they're daggers. They weigh very little, and we can have both of them equipped at once in addition to our main weapon of choice, and still light roll. But they also get this very fast uncharged heavy attack, where if the mist wasn't enough to block the status effect, we can use that attack to apply more build-up very quickly. Now, although these are my secondary weapons, I have them in my right hand because they're just easier to swap between and use that way. In my offhand, I have my actual weapon of choice, which is an occult-infused Raptor Talons. The Talons have passive bleed, and so if we infuse them with occult, we get high physical damage and decreased bleed build-up. It's less build-up than the bleed infusion, but more physical damage. The weapon art I use on this weapon is Endure, and what this does is that it allows us to not have to wait for our turn to attack, so we take advantage of whatever buffs or debuffs that we apply immediately. So basically, the playstyle here is that we inflict Frostbite, which will weaken our enemy's defenses, then we use Poison, which will give us a 20% damage buff with the Kindred Froth Exaltation. Then we two-hand our claws. We cast Endure and then just spam light and heavy attacks. which will cause bleed, giving us another 20% damage buff from the Lord of Blood's exaltation.
But wait! There is more!
We have 30 faith to cast Black Flame Protection and Golden Vow, which will give us more damage and defense. And we're also using the Old Lord Talisman to extend the duration of these buffs, and this makes it more likely that they last long enough to stack with the other buffs. Our seal of choice is the Dragon Communion seal, and the high scaling we get with it will give us access to all the fire or lightning damage that you want to deal, which is a million times better than using their respective perfume bottles. This playstyle shines the most in co-op, where boss HP is super inflated. For example, the Frostbite will increase the damage dealt by the entire party. Poison and Bleed will buff anyone using their respective exaltation talismans. And you can even have someone use the Poison Flower Ash of War when you inflict poison, which will remove the poison and deal very heavy damage. And the final talisman that I use is Melecine Prosthesis, and the 5 points of dex that it gives us are key here, because it lets us put these points elsewhere on our stat sheet. And for the physic, we have the Opaline Heart Tear for more damage negation, and the Thorny Crack Tear for more damage with consecutive attacks. For the look, I have the altered version of Tuelier's Garb, Tuelier's Trousers, the Berceptor's Big Hat, and the Perfumer's Gloves. You know what? I think this one turned out okay. Hello everyone! I don't have much to say this time. Thanks for watching and have a wonderful day!